Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Please put your where you are in the world in the chat. We love to see all of the variety of people coming through from every corner of the world. So thank you for being here. My name is Catherine Mattice. I'm the founder and CEO of Civility Partners. We turn around toxic work environments and we make them great. And I'm super excited to have Andrew Magaña and Jill Scanlon. They are from Odell Brewing Company. I saw them speak. We both spoke at the Craft Brewers Conference in Nashville. It was awesome. Taylor Swift was there too, but that's a whole nother story. I saw these two people speak about creating equity and inclusion at Odell Brewing, and I know everybody loves a good case study. So here we are. Do you just introduce yourselves briefly and tell us a little bit about you?
Hi, I'm Jill Scanlon, and I am the Chief People Officer at Odell Brewing Company. And I work with Andrew closely on our HR people strategy as well as DEI initiatives. And I'm excited to be here and share some of our journey.
I'm super excited. I've been looking forward to this. Andrew, tell us a little about you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Magaña, like Catherine said. I pronouns he, him, as you can see. I'm the People Strategy Manager here at Odell Brewing Company. So similar to what Jill said, we work in HR. We do a lot of the HR functions around the brewery, as well as lead and implement the equity and inclusion initiatives and implementation and that. So that's what we do.
Yeah. So just to preface this conversation, I saw you both speak, and I think a lot of people when they speak at conferences, it's kind of theoretical, or they'll maybe touch on like, here's one little thing I did at this company and something I did over here. But you really led us through this whole initiative that you went through, and I'm just kind of like, just repeat everything you said at the conference. But I know that wouldn't work. So maybe tell us a little bit about the beginning of the journey. What happened? How did you start? Let's start there.
I would just say too, we did learn from our craft beer HR connections and leaders that we've talked to, that we all were just craving just little steps that we could take, because DEI is so overwhelming and can sometimes be intimidating. It's hard to take that first step. So we shared some of the steps that we took with that group first, and that was the response as well. It was, how do we even just get started and take small steps? So that is why we geared our presentation at the CBC, the Craft Beer Conference, towards just like some practical applications.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I know it can be very overwhelming. Like, where do I even start? What do I even do?
Yeah, and I think in the beginning, and Jill, we were witness and part of different conversations kind of in the beginning, but a lot of it started from, there was some interest from Jill, myself, senior leadership, the executive team, at that point to start the conversation. But as Jill mentioned, it's vast, it's huge, it is, and it can be daunting, and how to approach that, it's really challenging. And so we call them, it has a negative connotation, but we messed up a lot, right? We've tried several different types of things. We had a diversity council for a while, and we were like, this is awesome, but it's not hitting kind of what we need or what the needs of our coworkers or community or kind of goals were. And I think it really did start from the founders and senior executive team, Jill, coming to you and being like, yo, what are we going to do about this? And then Jill coming to me and be like, what are we going to do about it? So
I think too, for us, starting with the things that Andrew and I could implement easily. So we were already responsible for the hiring process. And so we were able to implement a few things through the hiring process easily, because that's something where we had influence. And that was one of our recommendations in our presentation. Think about where you have influence and what processes you're already doing, and how you might then view those processes and make any adjustments with what we call the DEI lens. So, for example, we implemented inclusive language in our job descriptions. And we added some interview questions. We made our DEI inclusivity statement, if you will, as part of our job descriptions. And we started talking with our managers about inclusive hiring and how we might improve those processes. And I'll let Andrew expand a little bit more on kind of that inclusive language and those things that we did with the job descriptions and job postings.
Yeah. And another piece on this, I wanted to expand real quick on and how daunting it could be and how, like, where do you start? And I think and how we've messed up or had to have different iterations as we've gone. It's also because the work of equity and inclusion and implementing that in a workplace with a workforce, with managers, with so many different in an external environment where so many things can happen, it's always changing. And so if you're thinking about, like, hey, this big grand thing and grand scheme, well, guess what? It's probably going to change the next week or the next month. And that could be something from internally, or it could be an external factor that makes you have to change. But I think that's one of the reasons why it's so daunting, because it has to be changing. It has to be
ever evolving. Yeah.
Yes.
Your plan has to be fluid. Yeah.
Yes. And that's why Jill and I were talking about at the conference. The title of it was One Sip at a Time. We're in craft beer, so we always like to do that. And so because of that, we like to think of it as, like, don't think, aim big, make those big goals. Like, hey, our industry is very, like, monoculture, all that. Doesn't matter. We know that we can, like, shoot big. So we always said think big, but then one sip at a time, because you're going to need to change up how you address it. And if you don't, you're going to continue to not fail, but you're going to have some of those losses. And I feel like that you gotta, when folks, companies, organizations, teams, manager groups, leadership teams, when you can get some of those little wins, man, that's when things can start getting a little more traction. So I
want to interrupt for 1 second, just add something. I think with culture, inclusivity, these things that feel subjective or fluffy, it feels even more daunting, because behavior does feel, how do I know if my team's inclusive? Versus if your company's strategic plan is to increase market share or, increase revenue by 10%, let's say, that feels so easier, because it's like we can look at our P&L. And I just want to say that even those plans are fluid. No company makes a plan to increase revenue by 10% and never changes it. And so I guess I always try to compare, like, look, this doesn't have to be that hard. You can, if you kind of view it similarly to the other stuff you're doing, the other strategic plans that you have, that might be a way to reduce the anxiety around it, that it is fluffy and we mess up when we try to increase revenue, and we're going to mess up when we try to make things more inclusive, right? So Andrew, tell us some of the things you did. I know there's a job posting story you have that I have repeated many times. So I'd love for you to share that.
Well, you'll have to remind me specifically what story, because I got lots of job posting stories.
You took out the line around.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so you go.
So,
tell us that.
And so, and Jill said, I see a lot of folks, bringing up, like, fierce competition and talent, small business. And I think it always goes back to what Jill said. Where is your point of influence, and trying to make those small decisions? So, like Jill said, we oversaw the talent acquisition, right? Hiring, recruitment, onboarding, orientation, all of that. And so we're like, well, we know the executive team wants this. We have this influence. So let's get going. So a big one we did was, like Jill said, inclusive language. In that we really, one of the big first ones that Catherine's talking about is that we took out, we used to have a requirement of, a requirement is a passion for craft beer. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar with the craft beer industry in the United States, craft beer in the United States, it was thriving. Prohibition, which was the outlawing of alcohol and sales, distribution, making of alcohol back in the 20s. Then it came back, and then craft beer was kind of this thing. And then I would say, I don't know, Jill, like the 80s, craft beer started again, where small producers making malted beverage, which we call beer, and so craft beer is not. Craft beer has not been a product that is accessible, or at least seemingly accessible for all and every demographic in the United States. It has some connotation, whether valid or not valid, that it is for a select group, for select different backgrounds and identities. And so what we were saying, kind of Jill and I had talked about this, when we had put that in our job descriptions, who has a passion for craft beer? And that's when we were like, oh man. And then when you look at the research about the folks and the folks that look at every requirement, and they won't apply without having all of those requirements, we realized that by including that requirement, while it may be fun, while it may like show our dedication to our craft, was actually kind of a bar or a hindrance for attracting some of those folks who could be excellent at the positions that we are posting. Because when we really, Jill and I talk to our managers and teams, when we really get down to it, having that passion for craft beer is not really what's going to like. What we want is you to have an interest in our company, an understanding of our value set and mission and all of that. And with that, we would love for you to join if you can also do the job. Yeah. And what Jill and I have always said is like, if you join our company, you're gonna get to know craft beer, right?
Yeah, you're gonna develop a passion, and if you don't, then you'll probably quit, and that would be fine. Yeah, and it's a really great. I mean, I have literally told many people that story, and even recently, I have a mastermind entrepreneur group, and I was talking to my mentor, like, there's some things you guys need to do around here around inclusivity. I'm like, let me give you an example. But I think, that really is a great example, and it really highlights to consider what you're putting in your job postings, no matter what industry you're in. Is it something that really has to be there? Is it something you can teach? Same with, college degrees is another famous example. Like, do you really need a bachelor's degree or not? And, so just a great example of those little things that you can influence. And I often talk about being an HR ninja, that although everybody loves to say culture comes from the top, and it does, HR is kind of the keepers of culture, right? Because HR is the one who does the performance system and is holding people accountable to the right behavior and all of this stuff. And so, I often joke, like, try to do whatever you can that you don't need permission for. So if your CEO is telling you, I don't want to worry about inclusivity and DEI right now, there's still some things you can do to influence without permission.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And luckily we do have support and buy-in from our senior leadership team. But I will tell you that example of taking the passion for craft beer out of the job description was a huge culture shift for us. Mm. And so I feel like stressing the importance of getting that buy-in and talking about why we're doing the things we're doing in terms of making our postings more inclusive, our job descriptions with that inclusive language, getting that buy-in from those hiring managers was essential. So we can put whatever we want in the job descriptions, but if we're not really believing that or authentically sure. living that, then it would be problematic. So I would say that's essential. We put a lot of time into training also, and that is another area of our influence where we feel like we can make a difference by providing that training and the why behind the things that we're implementing. Yeah, I think it's been received, really well at Odell.
And so when you're talking about training, I'm assuming there's some company-wide training around things like microaggressions, being inclusive, and then leaders and managers, hiring managers are getting specialized training around coaching and being inclusive and kind of their additional responsibilities around this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So Andrew, and I'll let Andrew speak to his trainings that he's done. We usually do a quarterly training at our big picture meeting, and it can be 10 to 15, 20 minutes, sometimes more if Andrew's getting on a roll, which is great. But I'll let Andrew speak to that.
Yeah, Catherine, let's extend this out a little bit. All right, we got lots to talk about. All right, so stick around, everyone.
I got all day.
We're going 10
or
over.
We'll just have to have you back.
No, it's been really fun, and so I because you need to have and with process and practice, right? The ideas are good, right? Hey, taking that out, but how do you back those up? And so we've had the training is important, and it's not a one-off training, right? We don't do Jill and I don't, we do conduct company-wide trainings, we do manager focus, we do those, but then it's also like the consistency of talking about it. It's not, oh, it's tough now, let's ditch that and go with what we know. It's a consistent, like, no, this is why, and really tying it to our value set. I mean, I think that's one of the most important things I've noticed, whether consulting with other companies, within our own company, within managers. If you have a value set to tie that to, then it's not about a P&L, a win or a loss. It's really about this is part of our company, and this is how we're moving forward, conducting business, creating growth, all of those things. And so we always tie it back to our purpose as our company is to build community through beer, right? And yes, that some folks could see it as vague, and that's okay. And we can use that then to how does equity and inclusion work fit into that? And so that's where we tie that in. This isn't just a Jill and Andrew like we're on it ourselves. Yes, but it really is. It's like, this is how we succeed as a company. And so some of the things we do to back up some of those. So for instance, the taking out a passion for craft beer, we've also then made sure that during our interviews, we're not talking about beer in our interviews, right? Even someone in our production or our laboratory, we're talking about like, hey, where do you need to clean at? Much more scientific questions than that. For those of you who don't know, craft brewing is a lot of science. Our brewers, cellar operators, and lab are fantastic scientists, by the way. But we will ask questions around that. And we used to ask questions about like, what's your favorite beer or that? Those are fine, but what we really started going to with the manager training, the question creation, and then understanding the value set behind that was basing then the questions off of what we were wanting to see, like what the experience, tying it to the job description and that. So that was a huge shift in our industry, at least, where it used to be kind of like, oh, who do you know? Like, do you do this and that? And which was that is not a knock on that. We've just shifted a little bit to help support some of those initiatives, because you welcome bias when you start asking some of those questions. And it was a quick story I have from this, because we have these questions that we have, we build our questions around the job description. We try to limit as much personal, direct questioning as possible, right? Not to welcome bias. And also we took out a passion for craft beer, so we don't ask about beer. And we were interviewing someone for one of our accounting roles in the last several months, and we got through the interview. It was a great interview. The hiring team, we do one of the rounds of interviews, we do a panel. So the panel was there, and I was leading the candidate out, and she was leaving us. She like dipped back in the room with the rest of the panel. She's like, also, I like beer. And we're like, we figured, right? We're like, cool. And it's because I think a lot of folks, she was probably
thrown up.
She was probably geared up to be like, all right, I got to talk about beer too, right? Like, all right, this. And we didn't ask a single question about it. She was like, well, I like beer. We're like,
Yeah, good. That's so funny. She tasted all of your beer in the days previous. So I wanted to get to some of our questions on the out that we have coming in. One question is around the Diversity Council, which I had written down as a question as well. Could you give us a couple things that happened where you said it wasn't successful? Like what wasn't successful, or what was going on there? And then secondly, how did you just, what's the word I'm looking for? Disperse that council? Is it still around? So talk to us a little more about that. Disband? Yeah. The band isn't together anymore. So tell us about that.
I think the Diversity Council was kind of our first, like, let's create a committee, because we have committees and it's part of our structure right now. So we thought that would be sort of like an easy way to incorporate diversity and inclusion. And we just found that it needed to be a little bit broader than just a diversity group that was already interested in DE&I and maybe had more of a background, and we needed it to be more influential across the board. So that's why it didn't work for us. I can't say it wouldn't work for others, but for us, it was just that committee was already, already interested and wanted to learn more, and we needed it to be broader, I guess. Okay.
Did they have a task or kind of responsibilities, or what was their role?
Yeah, what we have said, and I think we still say it, like our only goal is just to provide awareness and education. And that way that let us just be like, we're going to explore it. We're going to be curious. We're going to seek training. And that was it. So we did have an external consultant come in and provide us with some education and training, but that's kind of where it stopped. And we realized we needed to go back and reassess what are our actual metrics that we might want to assess. And that's where the hiring audit came in, and some of our other initiatives following that.
Okay, gotcha. And did you have anything to add, Andrew? I just feel like, especially lately, me personally, when I'm on my sales calls with potential clients, all of a sudden, everyone's like, we have this DEIB council or committee. So it seems like kind of a popular move, but that's why I wanted to hear, what's working or not working there.
Yeah, I think the way we have it structured now, we have employee resource group. We through a lot of these learnings and that we did as a company, we realized we wanted to make space for employee resource groups, and I'll touch more on those later. But I think what was important about with those groups that we also hadn't formed yet and this is, when was this, Jill? Is this 2019 that we were doing this? Yeah, this is 2019. So this has been, again, we've had several years of working through this and ups and downs but I think one of the things we did is we were learning and we were building awareness. But I think one of the reasons we find that our resource groups are successful, there's a variety, and we can talk about more of that later. But those are spaces for folks to, like, it's a safe space. So I know it's a very well used term, but it's a safe space, and that's the first one. Second is it may be an opportunity for organizational output. Right? Like, it's first a safe space where folks can gather and talk but then secondly, possibly, maybe that is a space for organizational output. And Jill was super instrumental in the beginning when we first started the resource groups by saying this will be providing recommendations to the executive team leadership and manager group, right? This group isn't making the decisions. We are looking to them to make a recommendation to do it. And I thought that was just been very, very impactful as far as making sure to set the expectations of those groups and then having kind of that structure. On the other side of it, outside of the resource groups and maybe a diversity council, anytime I talk to anyone who wants to do equity and inclusion work in a business setting or a corporate setting, whether it's execs or, the non-exec, middle manager lane, or someone that wants to kind of come up, grassroots
Mhm.
it.
Mhm.
I've found, and this is qualitative, this is not quantitative, so I'm sorry I don't have any data for you all, but I've really seen that the two things that I think are most important, and I've heard this from another colleague, is support and influence. To
Mhm.
do equity and inclusion work, I think those are almost non-negotiable, support and influence. And so
Mhm.
if this is something where it's a one-person show or it's a one-group show and they don't have support or
Mhm.
influence, and
Mhm.
and I mean support and influence in a variety of iterations, then
Right.
it's going to be challenging to really have that, right? And so that
Yeah.
means support from the exec team. That means support from your line manager. That means support from your,
Yeah.
but also influence to be able to be like, all right, Andrew, go up and and do a training every quarter. Yeah, like
Yeah.
that, like set this, and then, hey, Jill and Andrew, what should we do about this? Like you, right? And then so it support and influence, I think, are two very key parts of a successful council, singular per unit.
Yeah. Yeah. We talk about that here as well. Our Chief Organizational Development Officer, Anya Soto, does, when she's the DEI expert on the team, and definitely talks a lot about allyship for those resource groups. Otherwise, if you send them into a vacuum and they're just sitting around bitching about all the problems, that there's nothing else. So they really, it's got to have the support and influence. Otherwise, it could blow up in the employer's face beyond just making sure you're doing the right thing and giving them support and influence. So I have a ton of questions here. So I'm going to let's see. So what happens? Let me just put it here for you. What happens if hiring managers aren't trained in DEI hiring and we get people in the pool? I tried to ensure that every fourth candidate was a diversity candidate, even if it meant additional efforts.
Yeah, and I think it's okay if you aren't rolling out a big manager training beforehand, if you're working with those managers through the process. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one area where you can train while you're going through the hiring process together. Mm-hmm. If that, I am not sure if that is part of the process there, but to us, that is even more beneficial because you're learning as you go and experiencing that process as you go. And you might also learn from, mistakes or things that you don't, that you mess up. So that's super impactful, learning through mistakes, which are also painful, but
yeah.
Which is part of the process, right? Jill and I wrote an article. If anyone's part of it, it's called "Comfort Not Guaranteed," and it's about the start of our program and because it's not, that's one of the things we will first say to anyone who talks to us about this work is like, oh, just get ready. Like it's painful. Even in so many ways you can't even we couldn't have really understood it, right? Because it gets into weird, uncomfortable, challenging situations you never expect. And I think on top of that, I'll add to that as well is that one of the things we've done in that, and I know this might not be helpful for everyone, you might not have this, but yes, on those different manager different postings, we will work with the manager to be like, okay, cool. What are you looking for? All right, you're looking for this. Awesome. All right, we'll put this in the job description. Like, what? Oh, so do we need this in the job description? Do we need, we're offering, kind of a baseline salary or pay rate on this. Do we need 4+ years? Oh, we don't? Like, okay, what is that 4+ years bringing of experience? What is that, master's in X field? What is that doing? Like, how are we tying that to success? Is it something Is it something you're just assuming? Like, and really going through there because as the question asked, right? Like sometimes we can put in changing behaviors, probably, and Catherine, you know this, changing behaviors is so challenging, right? Like it's not impossible, but dang near impossible. And so what you want to do is change. What we always say is update processes and practices. So you could do every fourth candidate, but then also with the new, you could get rulings like we just had in the Supreme Court in the United States, where affirmative action things, which you could consider that as part of that, might be in flux with either ideology or stuff. So that's why we try to do as much as we can on the front end. Job descriptions, getting the team ready, and we do a lot on transferable skills And so what we're always like, okay, hey, you want someone like, yes, this person has been brewing for 4 years. Like we want a 4-year experienced brewer with a Siebel Institute background and all this. But what if someone, had this experience and that, like, could that translate? And so we've done a lot of work on what are some of those transferable skills that may equate.
Yeah. You know what? You just said something a little bit earlier that I hadn't thought of. You said, what does that 4 years of experience bring? And I think that is a brilliant question that I've not heard before. If you're looking at a job posting or description, what happens at 4 years that this person needs to have 4? Could it really be 3 or 2? I think it's worth all of us breaking down or asking that question about all of these things, these years of experience. This is so awesome. So we're at time. I have a little time to stay if you all want to stay, and if our listeners want to stay. I'm happy to keep on going if you two are. I just love with all of these questions. Okay, so we've got a question from, let's see, wanted to ask what your accessibility process was like when potentially hiring those with disabilities. 1 in 4 people per the CDC are disabled, and it's becoming noticeable that DEI strategies don't focus on that population. So that's directly towards you, Andrew.
Okay. Oh, yes. Hey, hello. Thank you. Directed Andrew. Yeah. No. So I think our approach, we do metrics around different dimensions of diversity. But when we are thinking about an equitable and inclusive processes and practices, whether that be with guests coming into our tap room, folks, how they experience our beer, we're always trying to think of it, again, doing our best to think of it from as many dimensions as possible. Like, how does this product, how does this situation, how does this process hit X group, dimension, demographic, right? So we're always trying to be as intentional and aware as possible. So by that, right, any the variety and the 1 in 4 people for the CDC are disabled. So what we try to do is we are, and someone mentioned it, highly agile in our application process as well as in our interview process. So we try to make sure that our interviews, like, hey, are accessible as possible without like naming it, but being like, hey, does this work? Would you prefer virtual? Are you able to meet us here? If not, you will have the same consideration as this. And what we also try to do is make this, and this is something that Jill has been Jill and I have worked on a lot of, but making sure we're fair as possible with the process as we can be, right? So if we have a candidate who might request an accommodation, we will then try as best we possible to make that accommodation for the entire hiring process, just so to keep that on that even foot. For a while, we're like, because virtual isn't great for everyone, right? Not everyone either through heart of this or might not be able to. So we wanted to make sure that we're offering different things to do that, and we're still learning that, right? I think we're still wanting to make sure that we're doing it, but that's some of the things that we do. We try to make sure that we keep it as, accessible, but also as even as possible, to not then bring up any of that unconscious bias during the hiring process, because that's what we want, right? We want to attract those candidates and then make sure that during the hiring process that bias doesn't come out, and then we can work from there. I don't know if that answers. Jill, what do you got?
Well, I would also add that just checking in with your physical requirements. And I think, that was big for us in our production areas, that we had physical requirements that made it similar to education requirements that you might not actually need, or that you could somehow, accommodate those. For example, we would just put on many of our job descriptions the ability to lift 150 pounds because that's how much a keg weighs. And then we were like, do they really need to lift that? And maybe not. And so we started to, really assess what those physical requirements are, because that could exclude or make it you feel like it's not a fit. So
yeah,
that would be my ad.
That's a great example that as long as there's some people there on site that can lift up the 150K, not everyone needs to, I would assume. There's tons more comments here, but I have another question. I'm someone who's selling to HR all the time, and often they have to try to figure out how to come up with some ROI. And really, unfortunately, I have a job because not every CEO is interested in inclusivity in the way that they should be. And so I'm just curious, have you seen some ROI or other real tangible metrics where, I know I saw some metrics where you said we had X percent of women and then it went up to, a higher percent, but I don't know that that's necessarily relevant to a CEO who's focused on ROI, so I'm curious to hear like the business case that you could share. What actual effect has this had on your business? That I'm sure others are curious about that as well. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, Andrew.
Okay, all right. I think that's a huge question, right? And it's a great question, and it's a question we talk about often. I get asked the same thing. I'm not going to cop out, but my first response, a lot of that is, and we ask this. So during orientation, we have an equity and inclusion section of orientation, right? And so all of our coworkers will go through it. And so we ask the question in it. We say, why does diversity matter? Why is this important? Why is diversity important? So we ask everyone that, and we wait to hear like, oh well, it's you get different thoughts, and you can provide different products, right? We're in consumer packaged goods, so that's kind of what we're thinking about: who's buying and how to buy. And then our next slide is because people matter, right? Because at the heart of it, if we're doing this, and there was studies show, there was some research published this summer. Oh, I can't remember who did it. I sent it out, but there was research published. I think it might have been HBR, but there's research published this summer about when you tie diversity goals to like ROI or like that, that's where like that they can slip, right? There's like some negative connotation. Now, great that studies show that. I'm glad to say it, but you're right, Catherine. When you're talking with an executive team, a CEO, financial, how do you do that? And I think again, it has to come back to the value set, right? It can't if it's based purely on return on investment. One, this game is too long. The equity and inclusion game is too long. Like this isn't you can't quick fix it. Jill and I have been on this for 4 years now, and we're still like, we could have done that, but we're still building on it. And I think this game is too long to really tie it. If that's what it has to be tied to, that's going to be a challenge. It has to have a deeper level than that. That's my recommendation. It is a cop out. I do apologize, but what we have seen, again, our purpose as a business, our purpose isn't to drive profit and revenue. Our purpose is to build community through beer. So what we're seeing as what we would call our ROI is we're seeing more and more faces, more and more ability levels, more and more groups choosing to spend their time in our spaces and use us and purchase our products than before, right? We're working on almost like kind of like changing this idea of what our industry stands for, is acknowledged for. And so when we see these groups, and I don't have a metric, but I can pull this data for you later, Catherine, but I would love to look at the difference of groups or organizations that have either like contracted with us, used our spaces, asking us for sponsor. And I'm guessing that has increased in the 4 years that we've been doing this because of the different things. So we can get data on it. It might not be directly related to monetary value, but we can get data on it on some of those things, depending on what it is that investment looks like and what that is.
I think go ahead, Jill.
I was just going to say, I think that as far as the business case is concerned, executives do understand the ROI on engagement, employee engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think if you're building that business case around DEI, our coworkers value the DEI initiatives. We have an outreach program which ties very nicely into our DEI initiatives, and our coworkers find that is one area where they definitely want to be involved and engaged in our communities. And so I think just tying it back to that, diversity efforts are going to not be as efficient. Studies show, right? They're going to cause discomfort. We call it the diversity zone. If you're feeling uncomfortable, you're probably in the diversity zone. So the easy way is to not engage in those practices because they are challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think to build that case, you have to talk about the engagement piece. You have to talk about your culture and how it's going to influence and enhance your culture, which I do believe that, I'll just give an example, our women's coworker resource group, ERG, has made suggestions and recommendations. They're engaged. They ask leadership to be involved in certain outreach activities. They asked us to do bystander training, which we completed, mandatory training for the entire organization. And that engagement is huge for a business. So.
Well, I got to say, I'm disappointed you didn't hire civility partners for that training, but I'll let it go.
Well, we did it, Catherine. Me and Jill were like, it's a Jill and Andrew show. Yeah.
I forgot it's the Jill and Andrew. So I guess I was going to say that, the world would probably really appreciate if you could come back and write a bit of a white paper to say we didn't start off with ROI types of metrics because we didn't need to or want to. And hey, by the way, that was the right choice because it seems to have a negative connotation. But here's what we've kind of accidentally seen, because it makes perfect sense that if you have more diversity at work, then those employees are going to be out talking to their friends who previously weren't drinking beer, but now they're coming and they're bringing their communities. And so, it just makes sense that there would be a trickle effect of, and then also employers, or I'm part of a diversity, equity, and inclusion group in my networking group. And, we did have an event at a craft brew owned by a woman, and it was just like, we really specifically went to find a more diverse type of a brewery to have this event. So, I think it is totally worth it. I'm pleading with you, please put out some numbers about where you've seen some success. You guys have a book in your future. The Southwest Airlines has Nuts, the book Nuts, where somebody wrote a book about their culture and how it's grown. So I think you two are the next book that we need to have out there.
Well, all right. Yeah.
I support you. I vote for a book from the Jill. You can call it the Jill and Andrew Show. Oh no, you probably shouldn't call it that. It's about
But no, but I like it. There's something there. I think you're on it. But we would need. So I don't know if you're part. Our professional. A couple of our professional heroes are Savannah Guthrie and Hoda Kotb. So Jill, I think if we do a book, we got to get forwards from Savannah and Hoda. That's right. What I need. That's what I need.
I thought you were going talk show. I thought you were going talk show route.
No, well, we can talk show it.
We can doing a LinkedIn Live called the Jill and Andrew Show, and it's something about those two names together is pretty awesome. And we got people saying, Greta says, I second this. Greta and we want you to write a book. All right. Well, I do have to go. I'm so sorry. Maybe we could do a part 2 in next year or something. This was super fun. I feel so grateful that you had time to talk with me. And like I said, I know everybody loves a case study. So thank you for your time.
Yeah. And
thank you so much for having us.
Yeah.
Thank you. Jill and I are on LinkedIn. So if anyone wants to hit us up, of course, if you're in Colorado, stop by. We have a few locations in Denver and Colorado. So stop by and say hi. Catherine, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And I encourage both of you, this lives here forever. So if you want to come back to the comments, there's so many of them. Maybe we can promise everyone that you'll come back and comment and interact with people. So thank you again. Love this. Everyone's saying how much they loved it. So thank you. Bye, everyone.